Welcome back to the Tennessee Frugal Craftsman. I wanted to show you a cheap way. I mean, it's a little bit labor intensive, but a cheap way to actually make tongue and groove material. Now, I'm not making it to cover, you know, a big ceiling in a house or whatnot, but what I'm actually doing is I'm making it to cover my porch ceiling, underneath my porch ceiling. And here's some of the final product. You can see here. This is a piece of now tongue and groove. I'll show you how I'm making that. I don't have an expensive router table and all of the fixings that you would need normally to run these through. I purchased a tongue and groove bit set online on Amazon and realized it's not going to be, or it wouldn't do what I wanted it to do. It was making the tongue and grooves too small, so I decided to do my own. And so it's about a 4-step process. Now, the very first thing that I did this morning, I set up my table saw here to cut little strips, and you can see here these are the finished product. They're about 1/4 of an inch, not quite, maybe 1/4 of an inch thick. Made up a bunch of them here, probably enough to do 6 or 8, maybe 10 boards. I guess maybe closer to 15. Then what I've done, and these are boards earlier this summer that I actually set aside out of the stuff that I was planing, stuff that was fairly clear. I'll show you a bunch of what I have in here. You can see the stack I have here. This is where I'm pulling them off. I had about 80 pieces, which is more than enough to do what I'm doing. And the very first step, the process that you need to do, and if you're setting this up, the best way to do this is to have 2 routers. So I have a cheap Ryobi one that I've been using for edging. If you recall, early in one of my earlier videos, I use this to edge my 2x6, 2x4s. You can see here, I was just using it to round over the edges. Well, I put my chamfer bit on it, which is just a little V bit, and that's going to give me my V groove. And so the very first thing that I do is I take my piece of wood. Sorry if the wind is blowing here a bit. Try to keep it as calm as possible. I look at my piece and see which is the best side. In this case, that's the best side. And then I take my router and run the V grooves on each side. Once I'm done that, I'll explain it and then I'll show you, the process. Once I've done that, then I clamp this down to my sawhorses with my clamps, and then I run each side with a 1/4 inch cutting bit. So that's going to give me my groove on both sides, but that groove is also going to allow me to put the tongue in, glue a tongue in. Then I bring it in here once I get it to that stage, and I take and I glue the tongue in. As you can see, this tongue is now glued in. So that's my groove side. And then I just use some packing tape while the glue is setting up to hold the tongue in. So those are all dry. I've got about 30 pieces done here already, which is almost, well, it's over 1/3 of what I need. It hasn't taken that long. It takes about probably 7 minutes or so per piece to get it to that stage. And by the time you set up a router table and run those through, I mean, yeah, you could probably do one in half that time, but you also have the expense of the specialized bits and everything. And this way, you really only need 2 bits, and most people have these types of bits. They're not that expensive, just a little V groove, and then the 1/4 inch rabbet bit. So I'm going to set up here and show you. And again, hopefully the wind won't be too severe. but I will show you this process. It's going to be, I mean, the last step that I need to do after I get everything glued up and whatnot. Of course, I'm going to sand them, or I'm considering maybe taking and put them through the planer and just skim a little bit off. I'm not exactly sure yet. Probably end up just sanding them, giving them a sand with the orbital. And then what I'm going to do is, because the tongue is, I want the tongue to be consistent, because I'm just pulling these off of a 3/4 inch strip. I'm going to set the guide on my saw and just trim a little bit of this tongue off. So any places where, for example, it's got some in and out to it here, you can see this is just a scallop piece that came off the edge of a board. I will have a consistent width on my finished product, so it'll fit into the groove and won't hold it out, because that's about a 3/4 or 3/8 of an inch rabbit bit, so it goes in that far, 3/8 of an inch. And so by the time if you have a piece of wood that you're making your tongues out of that are more than 3/4 of an inch, obviously the pieces won't come together when you put them in their proper place. So these are just a little over 3/4. So I'm going to give myself about a 1/16 of an inch play. So I'll probably take that tongue down to about a 5/16, because all it needs to do is just lock into that groove, like a regular tongue groove piece, and give me a little bit of extra room. So yeah, let me bring you along for that. I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do this. I know it's, like I said, a little bit more labor intensive than some, but we'll show you how we do that. is coming up. All right, so at this point, we actually have a completed piece ready for the tongue. And so you've got a really nice V-groove on it. You've got the recess in it, the groove, and I usually pick the worst looking side to put the tongue in, because that's going to actually kind of give some reinforcement to it. So I just take a couple of these pieces. I'll set this down, kind of show you what I'm doing here. Fits in nicely. So, then I take my hacksaw, do this without knocking my camera off. All I'm doing is cutting off the excess length. And I'm going to come in here into the shed. Right now I've just got to glue up. Put the glue on it. Give me a second. My workspace is getting smaller and smaller. What I do in here is I just pop these out. Only takes a minute or so to do that, to get this ready. My glue set. Run a bead of glue and I'll put it towards the back. I'll explain a little bit more here about some of the best practices for this. I've kind of learned what is the best way to do this, but just put a bead of glue in there. It doesn't take a lot. Then pop these back in. Now I put the worst side up because I am going to trim a little bit off these later to get a consistent width on my material. Take my gloves off here to get this. Take the packing tape, and this is going to pull everything in tight. Doesn't take a lot. Put it on the joints. I understand why they call this duct tape. It makes an awful noise. Alright, not exactly sure when that went out. It must have just went out. I'll do another one here in a minute to show you again, because that went out. But so I'll put about 5 strips of duct or of packing tape on this. Got my tongue in. Everything is glued. That'll be set within the day. I guess this one probably could use maybe another piece right in there. I usually don't go any more than 2 feet, or any less than 2 feet for spacings. Make sure the tongue is in its place. Like I said, once you get going, it goes pretty quickly. So yeah, there is a completed piece. And so the only other thing I might do, I haven't decided, but I may actually run these through the table saw later and put little 1/16 of an inch kerfs, 2 or 3 in it, to keep the piece from cupping. It cuts the back grain here. If you did it like in 3 spots, cuts the back grain and it keeps the thing flat. Although it probably won't have too much problems because these are 4.5 inch wide pieces. I didn't want 6 inch wide. I just think that's a little bit clunky. But just a couple things I want to note that as you saw me working there. When I am running the routers, it's always good if you're just taking a little bit off, like the chamfer that I'm doing with the little Ryobi router, the one over here. You can usually run right along with the grain, against the grain, whatever, and it doesn't do too bad of a job with splitting out your wood. But it is always better to run back through the grain backwards, a quick run, because that will actually take out a bite of a lot of your wood, so it won't splinter out, or don't know exactly the term for it, but when you get your wood, it's chewing so much out at one time that it splits your wood. So that's why with that particular 1/4 inch cut, because it's taken so much wood out at once, what I do is I run backwards on the piece a couple times, and that will keep it from splintering my wood. And so the last run I run with the grain, and it smooths everything up really nicely. As you can see here, you get a really nice, you get a really nice edge on this. Sorry, get this thing to focus in. You get a really nice edge on this, and you don't get a lot of splinter along the edge here. This is not going to splinter out. So it looks, by the time I'm done, this is going to look like you got it from the factory. It just takes a little bit of time. So I will set up. We'll do another one. You'll have to excuse the noise here. I've got, still haven't got power out here. We're still using the generator, so it's a little bit noisy. So I'll set up and do one more in real time here, and let's see how long it takes. Taking off some of the excess bark that was on it. You don't want to make these too big because then they won't slide down in there. It's always good to have a little bit of play in them, so they'll also fit into the groove easier. So there's just a very happy medium when you're doing that. Sure everything is seated, which that is. Tight. Always good to have a knife here handy because packing tape does not split, does not tear easily. All right. That is complete. Now obviously I was moving the stuff around, so it's about 8 minutes. So yeah, when I'm not filming I can do one of these right around 7 to 8 minutes a piece. I need about 70 pieces to do what I'm doing. I've got to do about a 24 foot. My porch ceiling is 24 feet by 7'6", so I've made these a little long so I can cut the ends off. Anything that's rough I can cut the ends off, and I tried to hand pick as much of the better stuff as possible when I was planing my lumber. So this is not actually pretty clear stuff. There's some knots in it, but I'll shellac the knots. And so that's the process. I'll maybe bring you back when I go to the next portion down the road in the future when I finish these off completely, because I do want to eventually prime them, have them all painted, ready to go, just so that one top coat is all it needs to go on it. Because when I'm going to put these together and put them on the ceiling, I will run a little bead of caulking right down the joint between them, because these will have set long enough they shouldn't shrink anymore. But Don't know whether that'll help you, but that to me is one of the more inexpensive ways to do that with, you know, minimal tools. You can see kind of my setup. One of the key things to remember is when you're using those 1/4 inch router bits that are taking the groove out, you got to keep that tight. I don't know if you noticed me doing that, but I was keeping my router tight against the bottom or the face of that piece of wood. That's where a router table comes in. If you can use feather strips and whatnot, you can keep everything tight. And I do it by just putting pressure down and having my piece clamped onto my sawhorses. And I'm very careful. Of course, I've routed a lot in my life, but holding that down so it doesn't ride up. If it rides up, it's going to ruin your piece. And so you have to make sure that you keep it down. And that's why if you make 2 or 3 passes across it, taking a little bit at a time, it'll feed into that piece of wood a lot easier than if you try to take it all at once. It's going to want to either chatter, have splits out the side, or it's going to want to ride up, and it'll ruin your piece. And so I've done 32 pieces here, and I've only had that happen once, and it was on the end, and so I was able to salvage it. So it's doable, but I thought maybe you'd want to kind of come along with me for that process. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll try to clarify if something wasn't clear. I try to give instruction as clear as possible. So, but if there's something that's not clear, just let me know. I will say that when you're making your strips, those narrow strips over there, it is best if you're using clear pine. I mean, I've used a little bit of knottier stuff, but the clear stuff tends to be a little straighter grain, and obviously it doesn't break apart, and it's a little easier to cut. So anyway, until next time, I always appreciate you joining me. If you would like and subscribe, and until my next video, you have a great day.